Have you ever had the pleasure of eating a Montreal bagel right out of the wood-fired oven? If you haven't, let me fill you in on what they're like. They're spectacular. They're a little different than their American cousins, the New York bagel. The Montreal bagel is a little skinnier, chewier. They're sweet. They are just one of the simple pleasures in life, and especially when you go on a vacation in Montreal. Most people make a beeline to one of the main bakeries there, either Tbsp or Fairmount, and there's a little bit of a rivalry in the city about who makes the best bagels. If you can't get there, you can still enjoy a Montreal-style bagel by making them at home. So let me show you how. So the ingredients you need to make Montreal bagels are very simple. You need bread flour, some yeast, an egg, a little bit of vegetable oil, sugar, and one of the secret ingredients is malt powder. And you can usually get this at a specialty baking store, and you can also order it online. And it gives the bagels a really nice color when they're baked. And then after that you make the dough and you form the dough into rings, then we're going to boil it in some water that's been sweetened with honey, and we'll coat them in sesame seeds and bake them in the oven. So what do you say we get started? Our bagel dough starts off with bread flour. I have 5 cups of bread flour to start with, which is about 700 grams. And I have some active dry yeast. And you can use instant yeast or you can just use regular yeast. If you were going to one of the bakeries in Montreal, they use fresh yeast. If you have fresh yeast, that would be the optimal thing to use. But this is what most home cooks have on hand. It's what I have on hand. So I'm just going to mix that instant dry yeast in with my flour. And I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon of dry malt powder. Like I said, that's a nice ingredient to add to homemade bagels, and it's a nice thing to add to a lot of breads, actually. It gives some nice color and flavor. And I have 5 tablespoons of white sugar, and I have 1 egg that I've cracked in a cup. So just give that a good whisk with a fork, and then measure out 2 tablespoons of beaten egg. It's going to be hard to get because egg is kind of slippery, but just do the best you can. If your measuring spoon comes up short, just add a little bit more to make up the difference. So there's 2. And now I have 1 3/4 cup of water. I'm just going to dribble that in and get this going. Just start off at low speed. And I have 3 tablespoons of neutral vegetable oil. And if you've made bagels before, you probably have not added oil or egg. That is, from what I understand, a uniquely Montreal thing, and it's what lends to the nice chewy texture you get when the bagels are baked. So now we're going to let this knead for about 10 minutes until we achieve a nice, stiff, smooth dough. And if it seems too wet for you, you can add a little bit more flour. So the dough has been kneading for about 4 minutes, and it seems still to be a little wet to me. So I'm going to go ahead and add maybe another 1/3 cup of flour. I'm just eyeballing it. And then start your kneading again. Let that work itself in. You want a nice, smooth, stiff dough, not overly wet. That has been about 10 minutes. The machine is really starting to strain, and I think there's been a noticeable change in the consistency of the dough. So it's nice and smooth, very elastic, a little bit sticky, but I think we can work with this. So we're just going to pull this dough off the dough hook, and then I'm going to let this dough rest for about 10 to 12 minutes with a cover over it. So I'll show you what it looks like in 10 minutes. Okay, so our bagel dough has been resting for about 10 minutes. It hasn't really risen all that much. This rest is just for a little bit of gluten development. That's what it looks like. It's a nice, smooth, soft dough. And at this point, you want to get a few things ready. You want to line 2 baking sheets with parchment paper and set those aside. And you also want to get a large pot of water on the boil. And I'm going to add 1/3 cup of honey to this water. This is going to give the bagels a nice sweet finish and some shine on the outside once they're baked. So give that a stir. I should also say I have a baking sheet with a rack on top. We're going to boil the bagels in this honey water and then transfer them to this rack to drain. So that's another thing that you should have ready. So after you've got all your equipment set up, now we can work on shaping these bagels. So clean off your work surface and sprinkle a very light dusting of flour over everything, including making a little space where you're going to rest your shaped bagels before boiling. Pull this out of the bowl. Shape this into a circle and then flour your bench scraper and just divide this in half. So we're making 12 bagels. Divide this in half and then that final one into thirds. They should all be of equal size, and if you're concerned about whether they are or aren't, you can weigh them, but I'm not going to be too fussy this time, so I'm just going to cut that into thirds. Put these little balls over here. That one might be a little fat. Cut that half into half, this one into thirds. Okay, so now you should have 12 little balls of dough. That one looks like it might be a little big. Let's just pinch that off and add it to one that looks a little smaller. If you see any that look oversized, just do a little stealing from Peter to pay Paul. Now we're going to shape them. Make sure you still have a good, well-floured space. Take each one and shape it into a little ball. And then the easiest way to do this is to take a ball of dough and poke a hole in it with your finger and do this. And you want these to be somewhat bigger than you think they should be. Try to get them even. That one's a little skinny on one end. Just roll them around your fingers. And then set them to one side. Here's another one. Find the middle point. Make sure your hands are well floured. Find your center, poke your thumb through. And if you're struggling with making them even, and you want them to be absolutely perfect, nothing has to be perfect, but you can also just roll them out into a bit of a snake, about a foot long, and pinch the ends together like that. I always find my pinched ends end up a little skinny anyway, so I'm not sure which method you prefer, but go ahead and do what you like. So make your little bagel rings. And again, make them bigger around than you think they're going to be, than you think they should be, because they will shrink back like these little guys have. Last one. Some of them are going to look a little Humpty and Bumpty, but I think that's the sign that they're homemade. Not made in a factory, made by hand, made with love. So now that we have our bagels all shaped, and we're going to let them sit here and rest for another 10 to 12 minutes till they puff up a little bit. And if you notice that any are looking a little overly fat, just give them a little stretch. And I'm preheating my oven to 425 Fahrenheit, and I have my pot of honey water coming back up to the boil. I have my rack with a spider all ready to go, and I also have a bowl of sesame seeds. And as soon as these come out of the boiling honey water, I'm going to dip them in sesame seeds. And a Montreal bagel is traditionally covered all over with sesame seeds. And when you go to Montreal and eat these, you end up with sesame seeds everywhere, and that's part of the fun. And they're delicious. Just let these rest, and we'll get ready to boil, and I'll show you that step. Okay, our bagels have rested. They're all nice and puffed. I have my pot of boiling honey water over here on top of the stove, and I have my little assembly line all set up. I have a rack draining onto a baking sheet. I'm going to use a spider to fish the boiled bagels out of the honey water. And then I have a bowl of sesame seeds, and a traditional Montreal bagel is coated all over with sesame seeds. Here's the process. Take a bagel, and I'm going to gently drop it into the honey water. And depending on the size of your pot, you might get 2, you might get 3. I think I'm going to get 3 in here. And we're just going to let that boil for about 1.5 minutes. At the halfway point, you can give these a little flip. That's been about 1 minute. So now we're going to fish these out with a spider. Just put them on your rack to drain. I'm going to add 3 more. Gently, when you drop them into this honey water, drop them away from you, just in case that water splashes back. You don't want to get scalded. Okay, so let those go for 1 minute to 1.5 minutes. And now, while these bagels here are still nice and hot and wet, I'm going to just dip them in my sesame seeds. You need about 1.5 cups of sesame seeds altogether. Give those a flip. Take them out. Put them on your rack to drain. And then grab 3 more. A few more sesame seeds in the bowl. At this point, I'm going to take these and put them on my prepared baking sheet. This is quite an assembly line. And the last 3 bagels into the honey bath. Transfer these to a baking sheet. Out of the pot. And into into the sesame seeds with these. Onto the baking sheet. So here are my 12 boiled sesame seed encrusted bagels, all ready to go into the oven. And I think I misled you. I think I told you the oven was preheated to 425. It's actually preheated to 450. And right after we put these in the oven and close the oven door, I'm going to lower the heat to 425. And then these are going to bake for 15 to 20 minutes. And we're going to rotate them halfway through. So into the oven. Turn your heat down to 425. Set a timer for the first 15 minutes. And then give them a little check, a little peek. Our bagels are done. It's smelling great. So they're nice and golden, toasty. These are huge bagels. So they are covered in sesame seeds, and here and there you can see the lovely golden crust that was made possible by the honey bath and also the malt powder that was in the bagels, in the bagel dough. So now we're just going to let them cool on the pans for a few minutes. Then I'm going to transfer them to a rack to finish cooling. But the best part of a Montreal bagel is having it warm. So once these are cool enough to handle, we'll tear into one, and I'll show you what they look like and what they taste like. Our bagels have been cooling, and we have been waiting not very patiently because they smell fantastic, and I'm hoping they're going to taste fantastic too. Which one shall we choose? They're still quite warm, and as I mentioned earlier, the coating of sesame seeds is a trademark of a Montreal bagel, and it wouldn't be Montreal bagel if you didn't get sesame seeds here, there, and everywhere while you're eating one. So I'm just pulling them apart so you can see inside, see the nice texture. They're different than a New York-style bagel. They're a little chewier. Let's give it a taste. Those are fantastic. They're not quite St. Viateur. They're not quite Fairmount, which are the two big bakeries in Montreal which vie for who has the best Montreal bagel. But short of getting on a plane or a train and flying to Montreal for a little break, these come pretty close. And I think anyone you serve them to would just love them. Now, in Montreal, these would be served sliced down the middle, like that, and sometimes toasted. You can have them untoasted, smeared with cream cheese, some beautiful smoked salmon, red onion, capers, and then you've got a real Montreal breakfast. That and a good cup of cappuccino, you're in heaven. What do you think of Montreal-style bagels? Will you give them a try in your own kitchen? I hope you do. Thanks very much for hanging out with me while we took a little trip to Montreal. I hope I'll see you here again next week. I'm going to have something delicious as always. Bye for now.